I am a professor in a political science program, but specializing in government and in particular its relation with the intelligence community, as we call it here in the United States. Our program, the Intelligence and Security Studies program here at Coastal Carolina University, is one of about a handful of undergraduate programs in this field. And it combines two things: a critical analysis of intelligence with professional training for students that the majority of whom enters government work in some capacity or other. I will also say, of course, that part of the grounding of our program here is highlighting the difference between living in a secure state and living in a security state. The two are very much different from each other. We try to highlight that and ground this into our students. I will also say that my own personal expertise or interest in intelligence can basically be summarized in I work on topics relating to intelligence collection, collecting information that may be of interest to the security of a nation, but also dissemination, essentially methods and ways in which you can transfer that information to the people that make decisions. And of course, again, it's a critical approach, but at the same time, it does focus on training effectiveness of this, hence the topic that we're talking about today. The article that Charles mentioned that kind of gave the impetus for our gathering today was basically triggered by comments that the then president of the United States, Donald Trump, made in relation to the coronavirus. I'm going to give you a quote here from one of those from March 6th, so pretty much a year ago. This virus, quote, came out of nowhere. Nobody saw it coming. And another one here from one of his speeches, an invisible enemy which snuck up on us and which nobody could have predicted. We in our program, we're kind of lucky enough to have several students who are working in the field, former students, who are now working in the field of biomedical security. And it only took, my colleagues and I, only took us about a couple of phone calls to find out that these quotes, let's see, what's the technical term here? The president was lying through his teeth, essentially. I could have been forgiven March 6th in sort of like the surprise that this virus caused among the executive areas of government here in the States to have said that. By June, surely he knew that was not the case. In fact, saying that is actually kind of an insult in a major way to the United States Defense Intelligence Program. To my knowledge, somebody here might be able to correct me on this if I'm not right, the oldest in the world. In fact, it has its roots in a project that began in the Central Intelligence Agency called Project Impact. It wasn't easy to find information about this project in the open domain. However, what we have gathered for this article that, again, triggered today's meeting is pretty much all that exists in the open domain. So that, interestingly enough, began with a focus on China. During the Cultural Revolution, there was actually a couple of major meningitis outbreaks throughout China and kind of shook the local society. The Chinese unit of the CIA was interested in protecting its assets and, of course, its officers in China at the time. And that was what created Project Impact, the first systematic attempt by a U.S. government agency to trace an outbreak of a disease in a foreign country. That eventually was sort of packaged into a broader project, Project Blackflag, which essentially was an attempt by the CIA to computerize this disease information on a global scale, and even in some cases try to forecast trends of different diseases and how they would affect the health, the security, the stability of different nations, including, of course, China at the time. That really was kind of like the central pillar that eventually became the sort of the basis of the U.S. intelligence community's disease intelligence program, whose mission is kind of a threefold mission. First, to collect intelligence about the extent, the spread of different diseases around the world, which, of course, the numbers of people infected, the dynamism of the infection of the disease may be often concealed by different nations, either on purpose or not. Cases that come to mind, of course, in the case of the coronavirus was Iran, very notably China, although I would argue that in many Western nations, Britain included, actually did not do a great job either in alerting us or even gathering this information and giving us accurate statistics, even today. Second, to forecast the consequences of these diseases for American interests, American national security, and of course, lastly, providing those who make decisions with critical forewarning in terms of protecting the nation. Basically, the question is, if a disease is present abroad, how long will it be before it comes to the United States, whether it's Ebola or, in our case, of course, the coronavirus. So imagine, I guess, what I'm trying to make, the point I'm trying to make is here, imagine being one of those experts who work in this field for the U.S. intelligence community and hearing your own president say that nobody could have predicted that, disregarding, of course, your existence, essentially. And that brings me to the other part of my presentation today, which is the actual forewarnings. Our article that was co-authored with two of my collaborators, Anna Maria Langford and Derek Storzier here at Coastal Carolina University, did kind of a fact-finding essentially research to see whether the president's statements were actually correct. The fact that it is not correct begins, the proof that it is not correct begins with warnings issued many years ago, actually, by the National Intelligence Council. I don't expect people here necessarily to know the intricacies of the U.S. intelligence community. It's a very complicated intelligence community, as is typical of the American political landscape. It is gargantuan, actually. Not every country has the same model of intelligence as the United States, which means that America has something like 18. Now, we have another one this year. The Space Force has now joined the U.S. intelligence community, making the agencies that constituted 18, can you believe it? So the Office of the Director of National Intelligence basically is the sort of the coordinating body of all of these government agencies that do intelligence, and it specializes in providing long-term strategic analysis of both existing and, of course, emerging threats. The focus here is on things that are not necessarily on the radar of decision makers and policymakers. And the first warning that we found goes back to almost 15, 16 years ago in 2004 in a publication, an open source publication and an openly available publication by the National Intelligence Council called Mapping the Global Future. And I'm quoting from this publication. It's only a matter of time before a new pandemic appears, such as, of course, the influenza virus of the 1918-1919 that killed about 20 million people worldwide. In 2008, the same body, the National Intelligence Council, published Global Trends 2025. And again, a quote from this, the most plausible scenario is the emergence of a novel, highly transmissible, virulent human respiratory illness for which there are no adequate countermeasures. Of course, with hindsight, this seems so accurate, and you will see in a minute that these warnings become even more accurate with time. Another quote from this publication, such an outbreak would likely originate in China, as it is a country that is very densely populated, where humans tend to live in some rural areas, of course, in close quarters with livestock. But that's just the beginning. In 2012, during the MERS virus that hit predominantly the Middle Eastern region. Another publication, the National Intelligence Council's Global Trends 2023, states, and I'm quoting, an easily transmissible novel respiratory pathogen that kills or incapacitates more than 1% of its victims is among the most disruptive events possible. Let me remind you all here today that the coronavirus's death rate remains stable at about 3% of existing cases. Such an outbreak would result or could result in millions of people suffering and dying in every corner of the world in less than 6 months. That's the statement of this publication. It goes on to say that, interestingly, globalization would be threatened if the death toll rose into the millions in several major countries. And of course, that would, as we have seen, in fact, put a halt to global travel and trade during an extended period. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence also publishes the Worldwide Threat Assessment of the U.S. intelligence community. It's an annual publication that essentially highlights the greatest concerns of the U.S. intelligence community as a whole, all 17 and now all 18 of these intelligence agencies. We read in the most, the oldest reference to a respiratory virus that we can find. We read in the 2013 document the following statement: an easily transmissible novel respiratory pathogen that kills or incapacitates more than 1% of its victims is, quote, not a hypothetical threat.